Okay, we're back. Hello, everyone. This is Sujin Kwan, Managing Director of the Full-Time MBA Program in Admissions at Michigan Ross. I'm joined by several members of the Admissions Committee in a sunny conference room here in Ann Arbor, where the weather is beautiful. Thanks to the very many of you who have joined us today from places like Dubai and Kiev, Bangalore, Bogota, Lima, Kansas City, Monterey, and so many other locations. Thanks for taking time out of your day, night, to learn about our recommendations for how to choose the best MBA program. The reason we're doing this is because we know that there are a lot of great programs out there, and it can be daunting to choose which ones to actually apply to. I know I would be, because there are just so many great programs. How do you compare and contrast? So the purpose of today's webinar is to give you a framework for thinking about how should I approach this so that I'm not applying to 12 different schools. It's a lot of time and money to do that. So that's what we're going to cover today, and we'll have some time at the end for your questions. And we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we will have folks from the admissions committee online. So as you submit your questions online, some of them will be answered in that way, and some of them will be thrown out to the group for us to answer on this webinar. Okay, let's get started. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me have the folks who are on our team introduce themselves. I've got a picture right there. So I'm joined by two others who will be talking today. Michael.
Well, good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are, everybody. My name is Michael Lippert. This is my fourth year on the team here with the Ross admissions team, but my connection to Michigan goes further back. I came here for undergrad, fell in love with this place, even though I grew up in a big city in Brooklyn, New York, and my wife got her MBA here a few years ago, so you might hear me reference that a few times here today.
All right, and hello, everyone. My name is Taya Sapp. I have been on the team 7 years or 8 years, I can't remember now, it's been a while, but time goes by fast. I also, like Michael and Sujin didn't mention it, but I also have my degree from Michigan, so a proud Wolverine. You've got a lot of people bleeding maize and blue on the line with you today.
So Taya mentioned I'm a Michigan alum. Actually, I'm a Ross MBA alum from many years ago, and I've been here leading admissions and the program for many years, and one of the things that keeps me here are the students who come through our doors and leave with really exciting new lives, and we hope that you will be one of them here soon. So let's get started. What we're going to talk about today are the components of the framework that we will recommend to you for comparing and contrasting schools and narrowing it down to the list of however many you have the energy to apply to. So if I were to approach this process all over again, these are the dimensions that I would be looking at. What is the profile of the school, so I get my sense of what's the right target area for me? What are the career prospects? Is this a school that will help me get a job in the areas that I'm interested in? The academics, how do they teach? We'll get into that in a minute. And then community and fit. That's going to be a really important part of how to choose an MBA program, somewhat in the beginning, but definitely at the end after you're admitted to all of the programs to which you apply, which we're hoping. How do you compare and contrast them based on community, and why is that important? And then we'll share some tips about different components of the application that you can get started on now if you haven't already. I imagine that you have, given that you're on this call. I'm going to assume that you guys are really on the ball, and we're going to share some tips to help make the early components a little bit easier for you. Okay. So in terms of the school profile, how I would approach it is to understand where a school ranks. Now, if you've looked at any of the rankings, you'll see that any given school is in a different position in every ranking, and every year those positions change. Part of that is because all the rankings publications want to sell publications and be the preeminent source of information. So understand what is behind their rankings. What are they measuring? They all measure something quite different. For example, Forbes is primarily, or actually exclusively, the ROI, 5-year ROI on the MBA. And then others will take into consideration the diversity of a program, how many international faculty and whatnot there are. So depending on what's important to you, that's how you should consider each of the rankings. So use them as kind of a starting point, but don't use them to limit the schools that you're applying to. Now, location is, we know, a really big factor for MBA candidates. By virtue of you being on the call, we're assuming that you haven't ruled out Michigan based on where we are. But I think a lot of people do rule out schools based on their assumptions of what a location will offer. So hopefully you are the smart enough, savvy enough shopper of MBA programs to dig deeper than just the city. Understand what a location's implications are for your experience in an MBA program. For example, there are some schools that may not be in a major metro, like Ann Arbor, yet are easily accessible by airport, 30 minutes away, and are heavily visited by the top recruiters that you want to work at. So those are some considerations about location. And then comparing cities versus non-major metro, another thing that a lot of students are concerned about. One of the things that it impacts is the tightness of the community that you're going to be in. One of the highlights of being in a city like Ann Arbor, of course I'm going to tout Ann Arbor, is because 90% or more of our students are from outside of this area. So no one is coming with pre-existing relationships. No one has an established network that they're going to lean back on. It's not a commuter school. So you are going to, therefore, have a shared experience and have much tighter relationships as a result. So for those of you who had any trepidation about being in a non-big city school, that's something to consider. Class size varies significantly across programs. You have, on the far end, high end, you've got schools with 900, 1,000 students, and then on the small end, 250-ish students. Decide what is the right range for you. They offer very different experiences, very different networks, and how close that you can become to your classmates. So think about what kind of relationships and network you want to have. Student backgrounds. Now, I would say actually any of the top 10, 15 schools are going to have student backgrounds that are very diverse, from geography to industry to schools. So that is becoming less and less of a differentiator because all of us are striving to have very diverse classes. And in terms of statistics, the things that you'll want to look at are career outcomes, what the average GMAT and GPA and GRE are, but something to keep in mind is those are averages, and there's a range on either side of that average. So don't rule yourself out or don't rule a school out just based on the statistics. So those are some points of advice around looking at what a school offers at the highest level. Let's move on to career prospects. I assume that all of you want to get great jobs at the end of it. We want you to get great jobs at the end of it. How do you compare schools? Well, all of us will have employment outcomes, employment profiles available on our website. That's one barometer of what to expect, but keep in mind that it's a reflection of student interest as opposed to opportunity. So when you see schools that have a high percentage of consulting versus banking versus marketing, it's a reflection of student interest and not the kinds of recruiters that come to the school. You'll also want to look at where schools place their students. Now, we understand that most of the post-MBA jobs are in big cities, and guess what? That's where our graduates go. They go to places like New York and San Francisco and Seattle, LA, Boston. So take a look at that as well. And then the alumni network is a really important piece. It's not just the size and where they're located, but also how accessible are they and how supportive supportive are they of students and other alumni? And you can gauge that by talking to current students who are probably reaching out to alumni of their school to help them in their career search process. And finally, salary data. That's, of course, going to be something that's important to you, but don't let that be the limiting factor. Every school has an average starting salary. Again, that's an average, and there are data points on either side of that. So generally, most MBA recruiting companies that come to campus have a pretty tight range of salaries that they offer to MBAs. And so the differences in average starting salary are more reflective of the concentration of students going into particular industries. Some are going to be more highly paying than others. That is not a reflection of what a recruiter thinks a student's worth is based on school. The next piece of the framework that I would use are academic opportunities. Each school has a different approach to how they teach. You may be familiar with the standard case discussion, the case method, which a lot of schools use, including us. Some schools use the case method exclusively, and that is where you're sitting in a classroom, you're given a case, and you discuss the case, and there are questions at the end, and you answer those questions as a class, and you defend your position. That is one great way to learn. But there are also experiential based approaches, and that's where we are really differentiated. At Ross, we really think that students will gain that knowledge, absorb that knowledge much better if you're able to apply that in a real world situation. And so we have a lot of opportunities to do that throughout our MBA experience, which I won't go into in today's webinar, but look at the different ways that schools teach you business and management. All of the top 15 schools are going to have global study opportunities, so that's almost table stakes. All of us are going to have specialty areas, whether it's entrepreneurship or operations or sustainability, for example. All of us are going to have those. All of us are going to have concentrations in dual degrees. The important thing for you is to have an idea of what is that thing that you want to concentrate in or specialize in, and see if each school that you're considering has that opportunity and how deep are the resources for that area of interest. The final dimension that applicants should consider is the community. What kind of school, what kind of students do you want to go to school with? Community is comprised of not just students, but also the alumni, and how do they foster that sense of community through their clubs, through the trips, through the different aspects of the experience. How tight-knit does the community feel, if that is something that's important to you? There are some students who are wanting the degree and not necessarily the entire experience, the community that comes with it. And so you have to decide for yourself what is really important to you. If community is important, you really should kick the tires and get a feel for how do students and alumni feel about their experience? How close do they feel to their classmates? And how helpful do they feel that their alumni and fellow students are? Also, hopefully diversity is important to you, because that's an important aspect of learning, maximizing your learning. Learning from people who have different backgrounds, goals, and experiences and perspectives from you is hugely valuable. And so that's one of the things that we encourage you to look at based on different backgrounds of education, different industries that people come from, the countries that they come from, the ethnicities. All of those things are going to be important to the ability for you to maximize your learning. And that's what the MBA program is about. It's not just about getting that job, but it's about developing the network and maximizing your learning. So some early tips that we want to share with you from the admissions committee. I'm going to have Michael and Taya join me in sharing advice for all of you as you're embarking on this application journey. which is going to be oh so fun, we guarantee. A lot of the students a lot of the applicants that we've talked to later in the process share with us that they found it to be a really good opportunity for them to take stock of where they've been and what they want to do and why they want to do things. And it's probably not something that you've done until now, and it's something that will be hugely valuable to you throughout your career, so that you're heading in a direction that you're actually aiming for and understanding why you want to get there. That will be helpful to you to achieving your goals. Excuse me. So let's start with the three things that we think you should do at this stage of the game. We're going to talk about the tests, the exciting tests that you're going to have to take if you haven't already, the essay questions, how to approach those, and ways to get to know the schools that you're considering. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Taya so I don't cough in your ears. And we're going to have Michael talk about his tips for the GMAT and GRE.
Yeah, happy to do so, Sujan. I know the GMAT and the GRE probably causes the most anxiety at this stage of the process for a number of applicants, and I think we understand that. And so one of the biggest things I think is building out time in your schedule to knock it out early. So one of my first tips, especially for those of you listening who are maybe a couple of years out or thinking about applying it a little bit later, is to take the test as soon as possible. Your test score is good for 5 years, and your quantitative skills are as sharp as they're going to be, as close as you are to your time in undergrad. And so getting that on the books is a really helpful way of approaching it. The first thing that's even before any of the tips on the screen here would probably be to figure out which test you want to take. We really do not have a preference between the GMAT or the GRE. I think both tests indicate lots of success in our program. And so the tests are a little bit different. I think they measure some different things. There's different approaches to studying for those tests. So you really want to figure out which test is going to put you in the best position to show off your quantitative and verbal abilities for the admissions committee, to show that you're ready for the academic portions of our program. And that might look a little bit different. So I definitely wouldn't, just dive into one without even thinking about the other. I would probably take a practice test of each and see, how you would perform on one or the other. One behind the scenes tip, and this is almost breaking news that in a way, but our GRE, the number of GREs in our class is considerably a bit higher than maybe some other schools that you're looking at. And that, I think, should indicate to you that we really are comfortable with both tests. And so we post the averages for those tests on our profile, and you can get a sense of that. I would also leave yourself time to take the test multiple times. We find that a lot of applicants will improve on the second or third attempt, maybe even the fourth. I won't scare you more than that, but we really do see some significant improvements on the second and third attempts. And the point being that you need some time to do that. It takes some time to get it scheduled for a test. You need more time for extended study. So the last thing I want you to do is to apply with a score that's not representative of your best abilities. So build in time for that now. And then definitely put in the necessary preparation. I think these tests, for better or for worse to an extent, are sort of tests where you study the style of test and that approach, and sort of repetition makes a difference. And the last thing we want you to do is sort of step into it cold, because that doesn't really represent, I think, your abilities as best as possible. So some things to get started on now.
All right. Taya, can you share your tips on the essays?
Yeah. So essays are something that are very different from school to school. You will see some common themes, especially when it talks about career goals, but most schools have a set of essays that are unique to the school. So one thing that you can start on early is looking at the different essay questions from each school. Many schools, ourselves included, have released their essays for the next year, even before the application is live. So you can start getting a sense of what the essay questions are going to be, and start kind of thinking about how you're going to answer them, or even what the different questions are from school to school now. It's something you can start to think about earlier in the summer. One thing to think about is the essay questions a lot of times give you a little bit of insight into what the school values, or what the school really wants to know about you. The essays are a way that we get to know you personally beyond your resume and beyond the rest of your application before we get the chance to interview you. So this is your chance to really show a little bit of your personality and help the schools get to know you. At this stage, though, when you're figuring out which schools to apply to, I think it's an indicator when you look at these different schools to help you. It starts to be a little bit of an indicator of fit for you. If you are confident, you're like, I know exactly how to answer those questions, or this really lets me showcase who I am. I think that can be an early indicator. It's certainly not by all means everything that you should be considering, but I think that's something that can help you use as a tool when you're looking at schools over the summer.
Okay, and the final dimension I'm going to have us share tips on are ways to connect with the school. Michael, what do you have to say?
Yeah, so I know school visits are a really popular question this time of year. I was just in events in New York and Chicago and Boston, and this was probably the most frequently asked question I was getting. And my best piece of advice is visiting campus when the time is right for you and that you're going to get the most out of it. So what do I mean by that? I think some things to definitely think about are, when are students on campus? You're more than welcome to visit us this summer if you'd like. Ann Arbor in Michigan, it's a beautiful summer. But there aren't any students here. They're around the world on their internships, and it might be not as robust a visit as you were hoping to get. Also, for some students, they really, really want to see a class in session. That's a really important dimension for them. So we don't have class on Fridays. So we have visit days on Fridays, and they're great, but you may not want to visit on Friday if that's a really important thing for you to look into. There's also, I would point out, affinity weekends. So, for example, our women's community, or veterans over Veterans Day, or our diversity community. We have a weekend called Up Close and Wilk for our women's community. And those are incredible weekends. If you're really interested in that community and feel like being part of that community is going to be influential in your MBA experience, which we think it will, and that can be a really great time to get a sense of what that community looks like. So I would consider all of those things. We have visit days Monday, Thursday, and Fridays pretty much all throughout the fall, so we're excited to see many of you. But here's what I would say on the flip side is it's okay if you don't visit, and there's a number of other ways to really show interest and learn about how to prepare the best application possible now. So a couple of ways to do that are making time in your schedule for the MBA events in your area. Our team is about to crisscross the world in the next few months. Almost all those events are now on our event calendar, and you'll see there's a number of ways to connect with us in person. We'd love to see you on the road. There's also going to be a number of our interns interning in cities all across the world over the next 2 months, and we'd love for you to connect with them and grab coffee and ask them about their Ross experience so far. So that's a good way to connect virtually. We also have all of our student ambassadors on our website. My last tip would just be, and I can't emphasize this enough, I sit on panels sometimes with other schools, and they make it sound as if you don't visit, you're making this giant mistake, and we're excited for you to visit too, and I'm sure you will, but we're also going to have on-campus interview days all throughout the fall and winter that are comprehensive days to really learn about our program. So if you don't quite get to visit before you apply, we're confident you'll be able to get a good feel for our school and what Ann Arbor is like at another time, so don't feel like it's the end of the world.
Michael, does anyone get an extra point in their evaluation if they visit?
That is another frequently asked question, and no, there is no behind-the-scenes scoring system or extra points for just stepping on campus. That's not how we operate. I think.
Is there a negative point if I don't visit?
No, yeah.
Literally no points.
We're being clear. There are no points, I promise. You wouldn't allow us to. But, I think we want you to show interest. We want you to be aware of who we are and know about us and know that our school's a good fit for you. But there's a number of ways to do that without necessarily stepping foot here and having to take time off of work and an expensive flight. So don't feel overwhelmed right now if that's not in the cards.
Should I contact a dozen student ambassadors and list them all in my application?
I think, in interest of our student ambassadors' time, you want to be thoughtful about the folks you reach out to. And so we post a lot of information about students, their biographies, the clubs they're a part of, the industries they've recruited for. And so I think you want to target a handful that really give you a sense of what you're trying to learn more about. But I always do recommend reach out to somebody completely different from you and see if they're the type of person you would want in your network. I think that's a good test to learn about our community too.
I think it's important to think about the fact that we have mutual goals with applicants. We want you to get to know the school better, so you don't need to be doing these things for us and for us to see. It's more to benefit you. So if you can talk to people virtually or attend events close to you, it's most important that you're getting to know the school and getting to know your fit. And that's what we care about when we're looking at you, that you understand your fit and that you're applying to a school that you think is a good fit. I mean, we're going to be evaluating that as well. But I think you need to think about that in terms of this is something that's going to be benefiting you, and instead of this is what the admissions committee wants to see.
If I attend an event and meet an admissions officer like Michael or Taya or Sujin, should I follow up with a thank you email and tell them that I'm interested?
That's a good question, Sujin. Do you get a lot of emails like that?
I do.
We want you to stay in contact. I think a good thing to do is think about the types of things that would be helpful for you to learn more about the school. So you don't have to necessarily tell us that it was great seeing us and alone, but I think if you're interested in an introduction to somebody who's on a certain math project, or you're interested in learning more about the Fast Track and Finance program, you're welcome to let us know that and keep in touch, because that's what we're here for.
An admissions event isn't a job interview. It's a little bit different. You don't have an obligatory thank you, but we do like it when you have, if you have a specific question and you reference, hey, we were talking about my interest in healthcare and you mentioned the healthcare conference in the fall. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? I think when you have a relevant question, then certainly ask that.
But don't manufacture a question because you don't get an extra point for sending an admissions officer an email. Just
be careful what emails you send Sujin, clearly.
That's a really good application. That's going to help you the most. All right, let's move on to frequently asked questions that we've been hearing on the road. Let's start with Taya. I plan to be a career changer. Is there anything I need to show in my application?
Yeah, the good news is if you're thinking about being a career changer, you are definitely not alone. About 90% of the class changes either industry or function or both. So you wouldn't be the only person by any means that's interested in changing a career if you're applying to a business school. That's why a lot of people are applying for an MBA program. They want some sort of change. In terms of things you need to think about, this is your career goal essay is going to become a little bit more important in this situation. So if you are making a dramatic career change, if you are going from being an opera singer to being a brand management marketer, we need to know why, what the reasons are, and make sure you've really thought this through and it's not just a whim. You really need a change. We want to make sure that you've thought this through. Even if you're making more of a minor change, you want to switch from not doing nonprofit consulting to more corporate consulting or something. We want to see the reasons why you're interested and kind of that you've put something into your thought process of why an MBA is necessary for that and how it's going to help you. We do know that you might change your mind. We understand that, but seeing that thought process and seeing that you've really thought through why, at least at this point, this career goal that you have is appropriate is helpful for us to understand.
Okay, here is another frequently asked question. How do I pay for an MBA and how do scholarships work?
You want me to take that one again?
Take it on, Taya.
All right. The short answer is if you're thinking about this now, one thing you can start thinking about is start saving. An MBA is an investment. It is something you need to think about. So you can start saving now if this is on your radar, and if it's a couple years out, even better. But if you're planning on applying this year, that's totally normal. One thing to think about with scholarships is with Ross, the scholarship application is very easy. There isn't one. You're automatically considered with your admissions application for scholarships. I always tell people if you're we base our scholarships are merit based. They're going to be based on the strength of your application within our pool that given year. But you want to think about with the scholarships is We tell people when they're admitted what their scholarships are. We make it very easy for you, but you don't want to plan on getting a scholarship. So I think that you want it to be a nice surprise. Plan on not getting a scholarship, so when you're ready, you do have that extra scholarship to work with, and you're all set and ready to go.
Yeah, I'll also add, just because I saw it come in the question box about 15 minutes ago when we were talking about GMAT and GRE, that if I took my first attempt and I get the average score of the school, like, that's great, I'm in good shape, let me move on to the other parts of the application. If you know you can do better, I do think sometimes a higher score is part of enhancing your overall admissions profile for scholarships as well. So if I think having the self-awareness to say, oh, I know I can strengthen this part of it really goes for everything, but maybe the best example is I took the GMAT once, it wasn't that much fun, but I know I could do 20, 30 points better. That could really impact scholarships as well, so think about that.
Yeah. The other thing is we did award more scholarships this year than we ever have. So we do increase it and we change it. That's why we don't necessarily say we awarded this dollar amount this year or this percentage or this particular profile, because it does change from year to year. Hopefully we can continue increasing our scholarship budget for next year, but I think it is promising. But like I said, hopefully it's a nice to have for you.
Okay. I'm a non-traditional student, Taya. How do I demonstrate my ability to succeed in an MBA program?
Well, if you're a non-traditional student, you want to think about the fact that this application is holistic. So we're looking at your whole application. A lot of times when I talk to non-traditional students, they're very nervous about their quantitative background. That's one common concern. So you want to think about, okay, maybe you don't have that in your work experience. Maybe you are a musician, like I said, or you work at a nonprofit. But you want to think about maybe you have maybe you majored in finance in undergrad, or maybe you want to think about your test score and how, we're going to look at all these different things combined to see if to look at your analytical abilities. It's not just one thing. The other thing I would say, if you're a non-traditional student, is making sure that your resume, that we really understand the impact and what your particular position was. If it's not as particular a normal career path that we've seen, or a normal position where we know the progression, or we're familiar with the company or the type of role that you've had, make sure that it's really clear. It's really clearly indicated the impact that you've had on your teams or your organization. We are very familiar with evaluating non-traditional candidates. I think when we have a room full of people and we ask how many of you are non-traditional, it's well over half of the room that raises their hand. So I think you certainly wouldn't be alone. And the joke around here is that non-traditional actually is kind of more traditional.
The new traditional.
Yeah. I would just quickly add to that one that I think there's so many parts of the application that probably get overlooked as ways to show your transferable skills and abilities that are considered more traditional. So your recommender can talk about some of the quantitative skills and times you've worked with budgets in your work. You can highlight those things on your resume. Don't just think of it as like, oh my gosh, I need to get the best test score to show my abilities, because there's a number of ways you can show very traditional business skills in an application.
Okay. I know there are a lot of international candidates on the call. Do they need to do anything differently in their application by virtue of being outside the U.S.?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. I would say, largely speaking, there's not a ton of significant things here that you need to worry about. So sometimes we get lots of detailed questions about how do I convert my GPA, or will the admissions officer know my school or know my company? And thankfully, we've been doing this a long time. We have a fair amount of experience and got to know our students really well, so we have an understanding of that. So I wouldn't worry or expend too much energy worrying about those kinds of things. Here are a few tips I would think about. I would very much consider the timing of my application in terms of, is it really important to me to participate in the team exercise? I think we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about where we're hosting the team exercise and what that looks like. But if that's going to be a really important part of your application process, we may only be in your region of the country or of the world in round 1 or round 2. So really be thoughtful about that if that's an important part of your application process. The same goes for obtaining a visa. We're all pretty aware of the geopolitical circumstances going on right now in the U.S., so sometimes applying a little bit earlier sort of gives you the comfort and ability to get your visa in hand or work on financing options, because I know those are sometimes more complicated for international students. The good news is international students at Ross are doing incredibly well. The employment stats are overwhelmingly strong for international students, but I will say they tend to often be in certain industries. So I don't want to be overly limiting, and there's obviously exceptions, but there do tend to be certain career industries that are really more apt to sponsoring international students. So you may be thinking about how your career plans fit into that and having a realistic plan for the career switch you might be making or the companies you're interested in.
Don't keep it a secret, Michael. What are those industries?
Thank you, Sujan. We find that consulting, technology, and then finance and investment banking are the three industries that are most likely to be sponsoring international students. The thing that's really exciting about that to me is that those are the three industries that are highest in the Ross Employment Report. So you're in really good hands if you become a Ross student, and I think you'll find the vast majority of on-campus recruiters are open to sponsoring our international students. The last thing I'd mention is just consider English language requirements. If there is one piece of the application that's probably most tactically different is if you took an undergraduate degree in a language other than English, you will need to submit a English language test. For the first time in a very long time, we're now accepting the IELTS test in addition to the TOEFL, so hopefully that gives some more flexibility to some of our candidates.
All right. Let's move on to candidates with partners. It's often a joint decision for many candidates. What should they consider as they're looking at programs?
Yeah, I get really excited about this, Sujan, because I spent 2 years as a Ross partner and had an incredible experience that was above and beyond anything I could have anticipated. I'll try to be really brief and note that I will do a couple of webinars focused on the partner experience later. But the two things that really stand out to me is think about where people are coming from. Sujan talked about this at the start of the hour, and I think it's incredibly important for partners. If my wife and I had stayed in New York City, I probably don't think I would have gone to that social event that's a half-hour subway ride away if I didn't know I was even invited or who would know me. I think it's there's a real power here that 95% of our students are coming from somewhere else, the coast or around the world. Everybody's in a similar mindset and a similar life stage, and it's a real sort of removes any barrier to entry to being involved. It felt very natural to suddenly be part of the Ross community to the point where I wasn't just invited to things, I think partners were expected at things. I love that. And this is sort of related to it, but something I'd look for is every school is going to talk about their partner club. We have one too. It's awesome. I was a member of it. I love connecting with the board members there. But every school will kind of have something similar. For us, I think something that's really exciting is my experience was really intertwined with Julie's. So a lot of Julie's extracurricular experiences and social experiences, I was part of that. So over half of our social clubs here at Ross have a partner who's on the board of that club or leading that club. It's part of who we are, and I really felt like I was experiencing Ross with Julie, not just as an accessory. So I would think about how that perspective is for different schools and what your experience would be like.
Okay, let's talk about the timeline. What should candidates be thinking about in terms of dates?
Yeah, so there's a lot on this one slide, so I'll try to distill it down to make it pretty easy to follow. One of the big takeaways is it's very similar to last year. So we have a September 30th round one deadline, and you find out your decisions just before the holiday season for round one, and you can get a sense of when interviews are hosted. A couple of things I'll point out is we backed up the round two and round three deadlines a few days, or in round three's case, a few weeks, to give applicants who are a little later in the application timeline some extra time to put together their application. Specifically with round two, we felt pretty guilty making applicants writing essays on New Year's Eve, so hopefully the few extra days is appreciated. And then the biggest thing here I would want to point out is we really wanted to let you know when we're hosting the team exercise. So for those who are unfamiliar, the team exercise is an optional group interview as part of our process that we love hosting. We feel that the traditional application doesn't give us enough sense of your interpersonal and communication skills, and it's really important to who we are. And so we'd love for you to participate. We find that it helps most applicants' applications and lets us get to know you better. So we host those on all the on-campus interview days throughout the year, but more importantly, for those of you listening around the world, you can get a sense of when we'll be in your region. So if you'd like to make sure you apply as part of your application, you might want to focus on that round.
Okay. We have a few minutes left. We'll answer your questions. One tip that I want to encourage you to tap into is I have a video about this webinar topic, how to choose an MBA. And we'll put it in the chat box so that you guys have easy access to it. In it, there is actually a spreadsheet that you can copy and populate so that you can create your own compare and contrast template. All right, Michael, let's tee up some questions.
Yeah, I will preface this, both given the time we have left, but more importantly, we thought that the topic of this webinar would be a little bit more general and help people figure out what schools they might apply to or what to look for. There are loads of questions in here that are very in the weeds about how to apply to Ross, which we're super excited about, and I will just quickly plug, we will cover all of those in depth in August when we have Getting Ready for Round 1. That is an hour full of application tips, so we're excited to hear from you then. But there are some really good ones here. What about, we just talked about looking at Round 1 and Round 2, and so what do we think about when you should apply? Is there a big difference between those rounds?
Your chances of getting admitted or getting a scholarship are about the same for Round 1 versus Round 2. So we always tell people apply when your application is strongest. So if you are confident that if you are starting now, you've taken your test, you've started talking to your recommenders, if you are confident your application is going to be ready for our September 30th deadline, then by all means do it. If you think there's something that if waiting until early January is going to help you make your application stronger, you're going to take the test score again, you have maybe a major project that you're completing that you want to demonstrate that impact in your application, then wait till January. In our minds, there's not a significant difference in terms of when your chances of being admitted or getting a scholarship. So a great application in Round 2 is much better than a good one in Round 1.
Yeah, that is my line. I love it. I love this.
Trademark thing, I would have put it there.
I love this question, and so I'm going to answer it. But there's a question about how MBA alumni are always talking about their MBA network and how do you utilize your network and what are some things to think about your alumni network if everybody's in all different industries. And so that's a really good question. The thing I get excited talking about on this one is if you come to Ross, you're part of the Greater Michigan Network. And so we have the largest alumni network in the world. There's nearly 600,000 Michigan alumni around the world, and I really believe that Michigan alums as a whole, including Ross alums, are some of the most passionate and excited alums there are. But I think if you're thinking about, healthcare or an impact-related role or something that feels maybe a little less traditional than the typical business network, you have access to the entire Michigan network in that space. Michigan's home to over 100 top 10 graduate degree programs. There's only one other school in the world that can say that, and that's your alumni network too. So I think tapping into that and having access to that is an extremely compelling thing to think about as you compare and contrast MBA programs. And I would test it as a social proof. Reach out to a Michigan alum and see how quickly they get back to you and how excited they are to talk about their program. We always joke that they're quicker than a lot of our peer schools, but also you usually get homework to talk to 3 or 4 other people in their network. That's kind of the Michigan way. So take advantage of it. What other questions are here? What about if you're thinking about dual degrees? How would you, what are our recommendations for learning more about whether the dual degree is right for you? And then also, what about that application process? What are things to be thinking about now? Because it's a little bit different, right?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about a dual degree, Michigan should definitely be on your radar just because, as Michael just said, there's over 100 graduate programs in the top 10. So there's a great opportunity to be doing a dual degree with a program like the School like if you're interested in studying sustainability and the environment, if you're interested in public policy, or public health, there's a lot of different programs. So our website lists over 20 different programs that are already established dual degrees. You can start looking into those. We also have a couple students that have done customized dual degrees. We have some of those each year. There's one program with our College of Engineering in design that is one of our students is doing right now and customized a program. So you can start looking at the website, contact a member of our team. We can connect you with current students that are doing dual degrees and those that you're interested in. And there'll also be a webinar for dual degree students too if you want more information.
Awesome. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I see some questions coming in about there being a recording. So we will send out a recording of this webinar. We hope you can follow it, which is exciting, and you can go back to anything you might have missed. A couple of other questions. What about Taya? We didn't talk about, we just assumed, I guess everybody listening is super excited about the full-time MBA, but we realize for some people they are thinking about maybe a part-time program, or even if they're a little bit older, an executive program, and we're excited about the ones here at Ross, but on a general level, what are a couple of things that might help somebody listening figure out which program's right for them or ways to learn?
I mean, you can start, I think one place to start would be looking at the profiles for those different programs and getting an understanding of what the applicants are or what the classes look like in those different programs. There's certainly some similarities, and I can understand why some people might be struggling to know. You just want to start talking to students in these different programs. The full-time MBA is very typical if you want to do a major career change. It's a very immersive program, so you're going to be really getting to know your classmates well and attending club events and recruiting events, and it's more of an immersive experience, where sometimes the part-time programs are a little bit more of focused on here's the classes, and if you want to be involved in some of those other things, they're an option if you choose to opt into them, but it's a little bit more, you have to seek those things out. So I think it's up to the student. If you're on the fence about which program to attend, the best thing is to start looking at the profiles to see the differences and which one is a good fit for you, and then talk to admissions team members from each of the different programs.
I'm going to throw out the last question to Michael and Taya. It is now mid-June. If I want to apply in round one, what advice do you have for me at this stage when I've got, let's see, June, July, August, September, about 3 months out? What would you tell me to do?
One thing that comes to mind right away, I think it's on the next slide actually, is work on the simple parts of the application, because those are going to be posted in about a month or so. So I know it sounds almost silly in a way to the folks listening, but some of these applications that ask a lot of questions, we try to make ours as straightforward as possible and hopefully easier than some other schools. But there are going to be just a lot of questions that take some time to fill those out. So you can fill those out like your birth date and where you've worked the past few years. Those things are constant. You can just do those and get those out of the way on a sort of a rainy night, and then not have to worry about those the night before the deadline. So kind of get a little bit out ahead of that. I think the same rule goes for the essay questions. Those are out now, and you can start working on those. So I think formulating your first draft, getting a sense of the story you're going to tell, and how that feels, and then you sort of have some time to marinate on it. So I would not wait to the deadline on putting together an essay, because I think it sometimes takes a couple of drafts to really get a good sense of what the story you're trying to tell is.
Taya, what's your nugget?
So mine is also on the slide. Whoever put this together knew what they were talking about. But I would say go to these. Start going to events. We have a ton of different events over the next few months in most major cities, and if not, we have some webinars. I know there's one with alumni that'll be a virtual webinar in July. So start going to these and listening to people. You don't want to just talk to one student ambassador or one member of the admissions team or one alum. You want to get hear a variety of experiences, and it doesn't have to be a personal conversation every time. You just want to get a broad sense of the experiences that people have had at Ross and at the different programs that you're looking at, to start saying, okay, that sounds interesting, and so does that, and so does that. So you can start building your own excitement for this. It is an exciting time for you, hopefully.
So you see the other next steps that we have on the slide. Those are really good tips. we're really excited for you to be on this journey, and we are looking forward to being partners with you throughout it. A year from now, next June, hopefully you will be excited about starting at the MBA program of your choice. Hopefully it's Ross. Your life is going to take a very different direction a year from now, and the seeds are sown right now. Hopefully these tips were helpful to you, and stay tuned for future webinars where we're going to give away as much information as we can to make this process as least painful as it can be. So good luck. Enjoy your summer or winter wherever you may be. And as always, go blue.
Go blue.
All right.
Excited to meet you on the road.
Bye, all.